Picture a Europe with no cities, no roads, no borders, just ice. Not the gentle frost of a winter morning, but a cold that had swallowed an entire continent. Glaciers buried most of what we'd now call Scandinavia, Britain, and northern Germany under sheets of ice thick enough to bury a skyscraper. South of that ice, the land wasn't much friendlier. Wind-scoured plains, frozen rivers, grass stretching to a horizon broken only by the occasional stunted pine. This was the world 35,000 years ago, and it belonged to monsters. Woolly mammoths 4 meters tall, with curved tusks longer than a grown man, moved in herds across the tundra. Woolly rhinoceroses, built like armored tanks, grazed alongside them, and stalking both, patient, enormous, and considerably larger than any lion alive today, were cave lions, apex predators with nothing above them in the food chain, except, perhaps, each other. Into this world walked a strange, hairless, upright primate, carrying sharpened stone and burning branches. Somehow, against every reasonable expectation, that primate won. Here's the part most people get wrong, though. The humans who eventually conquered Ice Age Europe weren't the first of our kind to try. Not even close. Deep in a cave called Apidema, on the Greek coast, archaeologists found a fragment of skull. Modern human, not Neanderthal. When they dated it, the number didn't make sense at first. Roughly 210,000 years old. That's not a typo. 210,000 years before the events we're describing here. It means Homo sapiens attempted to settle Europe almost as soon as we existed as a species. Tens of thousands of years before the famous out-of-Africa migration most documentaries focus on. And it means that attempt failed. Whoever left that skull behind didn't found a lasting population. Europe swallowed them. It wasn't a one-off either. In Bulgaria, a cave called Bachokiro holds tools and bone fragments dated to around 47,000 years ago, a distinct technological tradition archaeologists now label the initial Upper Paleolithic. These people weren't Aurignacian. They were a separate wave, a separate attempt, a group that pushed into Europe's frontier and then vanished from the record entirely, erased by cold, by competition, by whatever it takes to wipe out a small population that leaves behind no written account of its own extinction. So by the time we reach 45,000 years ago, this isn't humanity's first knock on Europe's door. It's maybe the third or fourth. This time, though, something was different. This time, the door stayed open. To understand why this particular wave succeeded where the others failed, we need to back up a few thousand years and talk about ice. Around 3,000 to 4,000 years earlier, so somewhere close to 38,000 years ago, something happened far to the north that reshaped the whole continent. Massive chunks of the polar ice sheet broke away and slid into the Atlantic, a phenomenon geologists now call a Heinrich event. It sounds abstract, almost bureaucratic, the sort of thing you'd skim past in a textbook. It wasn't abstract if you were alive for it. Ocean currents stalled, temperatures collapsed. Europe's green forests, what little remained of them, shriveled into brittle grassland and frozen steppe. The ecosystem Neanderthals had spent hundreds of thousands of years mastering simply stopped existing. Around that same moment, Neanderthals disappear from the European record. Entirely. A species that had survived on this continent for the better part of 500,000 years, that had outlasted earlier ice ages, that knew this land more intimately than any hominin before or since, vanished within a geological eye blink of that climate shock. Did they die out completely? Did they interbreed with the arriving Homo sapiens until their genetic identity simply dissolved into ours? Most researchers now lean towards some mix of both. The timing, either way, is hard to ignore. One population fell as the world turned hostile. Another rose to take its place. That rising population is what archaeologists call the Aurignacian culture, named, a little unglamorously, after a cave near the French town of Aurignac, where their tools were first identified. Where they actually came from has turned into one of the more stubborn, open questions in Ice Age archaeology. Some researchers trace their roots to the Levant, the region we'd now think of as the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, pointing to strikingly similar stone tools turning up there around the same period. Others argue for an origin in the Zagros Mountains of what's now Iran. Nobody has settled it. What we do know is that wherever they came from, they arrived carrying something the earlier, failed waves apparently lacked: the ability to actually stay. Try holding this number in your head for a second. Somewhere around 1,500 people. That's the estimated total population of Homo sapiens spread across the whole of Western and Central Europe at this point. Not 1,500 per valley, not 1,500 per region, 1,500 total, scattered across a landmass roughly the size of the modern European Union. A single mid-sized stadium could have seated every human being on the continent with room left over, and yet this tiny scattered population was remarkably well connected for people with no roads, no writing, and no animals to ride. They carried high-quality tool-making stone hundreds of kilometers from its source, which tells us they either covered those distances themselves or traded with neighbors who did. Different bands likely converged at particular locations during particular seasons, natural meeting points along migration routes, where they feasted on fresh kills, traded materials, swapped news, and taught each other new tricks for staying alive. Then they scattered again, tracking herds across a landscape they knew with an intimacy that's almost impossible to picture now. Every river bend, every seasonal spring, every sheltering outcrop of rock, memorized and handed down. Staying alive at this level of precision required better equipment than Neanderthals had ever built, and that gap becomes visible fast once you look at the tools themselves. One signature Aurignacian innovation was the bladelet, a small stone blade, often no more than 5 centimeters long, struck off a prepared core with striking consistency. Neanderthals had favored heavier, bulkier stone tools. Bladelets were the opposite philosophy entirely. Light, easy to carry in bulk, fast to produce, and adaptable to almost any purpose the moment called for. But stone wasn't really where the real story lived. The sharpest gap between these newcomers and the Neanderthals who came before them shows up in a completely different material: bone and antler. Neanderthals weren't wholly ignorant of bone tools, but for Homo sapiens, bone and antler became something closer to a primary technology, standing right alongside stone. Archaeologists have noticed something odd about the timing. Bone and antler use spikes dramatically right around that climate catastrophe 40,000 years back. Why would a harsher environment push people toward antler instead of stone? The answer turns out to be wood, or the lack of it. As forests collapsed into tundra and open steppe, the straight, light, flexible timber needed for spear shafts turned scarce. Pine and birch were about all that remained, and neither was ideal. Good wood became a precious, hard-to-replace resource almost overnight. That scarcity forced a genuinely clever workaround: the split-based point. Under the standard design, you'd carve a groove into a wooden shaft and wedge a stone point into it. Aurignacian hunters flipped that logic on its head. They carved the groove into the base of an antler point instead and fitted the wooden shaft into that. Sit with the reasoning for a second, because it's worth appreciating. When a spear struck a large, thrashing animal, the impact often snapped something. Under the old design, you lost the shaft, the part that took the longest to source and was hardest to replace. Under this new design, the antler tip was engineered to be the sacrificial piece. It could shatter and stay lodged in the animal, while the wooden shaft came away intact, ready to take a fresh point and be thrown again. Reindeer antler, unlike a good straight branch, was everywhere. Losing a point cost almost nothing. Losing a shaft could cost you the entire hunt. These antler-tipped spears weren't just clever engineering either. They were brutally effective in practice. Researchers who've reconstructed and tested the design found that the split-based point didn't just punch a hole and stop. The shape of the tip kept the wound channel open as the animal moved, which meant faster, heavier blood loss. Something as massive as a woolly rhinoceros could go down in seconds rather than minutes. Call it the semi-automatic weapon of the Ice Age if you want a modern comparison. Hunters could reload and strike again at a speed older designs simply couldn't match. Antler and bone weren't reserved for killing either. Mammoth ivory got carved into ornaments and small figures. Plain bone was shaped into needles fine enough to sew tight, insulated clothing, arguably as important to surviving an Ice Age winter as any weapon. There might have been more than pure practicality behind the choice to arm themselves with antler specifically, too. Some researchers suspect a spiritual layer to it, the idea that killing with a weapon carved from a hunted animal's own body transferred something of that animal's strength, or its spirit, into the hunt itself. For people whose whole world revolved around daily proximity to death, a belief like that wouldn't have been unusual at all. Of everything this culture left behind, one object keeps puzzling archaeologists more than any other. A long piece of antler or bone, pierced through with one or two large holes, often carved with decorative patterns. When these were first unearthed in 1867, researchers gave them a grand French name, bâtons de commandement, batons of command, on the assumption that they were staffs of office, symbols of tribal leadership, maybe ceremonial or even magical objects. Modern analysis has quietly dismantled that idea. Under microscopic examination, the insides of those drilled holes show clear wear patterns consistent with rope or cord being pulled through them, repeatedly under real force. More force than bare hands alone could generate. The current best guess is far less glamorous than chieftain's scepter, and honestly more interesting. These were working tools, probably used for straightening or tensioning cord, securing tent poles, rigging some kind of pulley to hoist butchered meat out of reach of scavenging predators, or possibly helping haul a sled across snow. Nobody's entirely sure which of these jobs, maybe several at once, the objects actually did. What's remarkable is how long the design held. From the start of the Aurignacian right through to the Mesolithic period roughly 15,000 years later, this single tool's basic shape barely changed. That's not the mark of people fumbling through survival by trial and error. That's the mark of people who got a design right the first time and saw no reason to touch it. So, what were all these weapons actually killing? Ask most people to picture Ice Age hunting and they'll describe a family roasting mammoth steaks over an open fire. A fair assumption, honestly, given how much mammoths dominate our cultural image of this period. The bones tell a much less dramatic story, though. Across excavated sites in Western and Central Europe, somewhere between 91 and 99% of animal bones recovered from Aurignacian layers belong to one species. Not mammoth, reindeer. The logic behind that number is simple and practical. Reindeer moved in enormous herds, meaning a single successful hunt could supply meat, hide and antler for an entire group at once, a far better return on effort than chasing solitary megafauna across open ground. As the climate worsened and forests gave way to open tundra, reindeer were also simply one of the few large animals that could still thrive in that landscape at all. Food, clothing material, and tool-making supply wrapped into one four-legged package. It's hard to overstate how central they were to keeping these populations alive. Head east toward what's now Russia, and the picture shifts. Fewer natural caves meant fewer fixed shelters, so groups there tended to live more nomadically, following prey instead of returning to a home base. Their prey of choice wasn't reindeer, it was wild horses. Excavations at sites dated to roughly 32,000 to 34,000 years ago have turned up striking evidence of organized mass hunts, one layer alone containing the remains of close to 2,000 horses. That's not opportunistic hunting. That's coordination, planning, and very likely some method of driving large numbers of animals toward a kill site all at once. Coastal life is frustratingly harder to reconstruct. Sea levels have risen so much since the end of the Ice Age that most of the old coastline, along with whatever shelters once sat on it, now lies permanently underwater, out of archaeological reach. What little we know comes from a handful of elevated sites that stayed above the waterline. A rock shelter called El Cuco in Spain's Cantabria region yielded roughly 860 shells, most of them limpets, easy pickings that required none of the sophisticated hunting technology described above, just patience and a coastline to walk. At another Spanish site, El Pendo, excavators found something genuinely odd sitting in an Aurignacian lair, a massive sperm whale tooth with no cut marks anywhere on it. Whatever relationship these people had with that tooth, it wasn't butchery. Maybe someone found it washed ashore and decided something this strange deserved to be carried home. Maybe a whale beached itself nearby and an opportunistic group turned an accident into a feast. We'll likely never know for certain, but both possibilities are worth sitting with. There's something that doesn't quite add up though, if you only look at diet. These people were eating reindeer and horse day after day, year after year. Look at what they chose to paint and carve instead, and reindeer barely appear at all. What dominates their art isn't dinner, it's danger. Roughly 30,000 years ago, a rockfall sealed the entrance to a cave in southern France so completely that the interior sat untouched by weather or human traffic for tens of thousands of years. When it was finally rediscovered, the cave, now known as Chauvet, turned out to be one of the most extraordinary time capsules in the history of archaeology. Inside are roughly 420 individual images: lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, hyenas, horses, deer, rendered with a level of observational skill that still stops professional artists in their tracks today. The painters worked with three basic pigments: red ochre, an iron-rich mineral, the natural white of the limestone wall itself, and black charcoal. Only the charcoal can be radiocarbon dated directly, and those dates place the paintings somewhere between 39,000 and 33,000 years ago. The techniques on display are surprisingly varied for something this old. For the white imagery, artists didn't apply paint at all. They scraped away the thin layer of sediment coating the wall to expose the pale limestone underneath, essentially drawing in negative space. Elsewhere, someone dragged a finger through soft mineral deposits to sketch what looks unmistakably like an owl. The red ochre work shows even more range, hand stencils made by pressing a pigment-coated palm against the stone, and elsewhere, pigment apparently blown through a hollow bone tube to create a fine spray, close to an airbrush effect. One rhinoceros painting, examined closely, shows parallel lines consistent with a brush-like tool rather than a finger or a stamped palm, meaning these artists, 35,000 years before anyone invented the paintbrush as we'd recognize it, had already worked out something functionally identical. Then there are the hunting scenes, and this is where Chauvet turns genuinely unsettling. Panel after panel shows cave lions working together to bring down bison and rhinoceros, coordinated, deliberate, rendered with a narrative energy you don't expect from something this old. These weren't random animal portraits, they were stories. It's worth pausing on exactly how dangerous these animals actually were. European cave lions were noticeably larger than the African lions we know today, and if they hunted the way modern lions do, largely under cover of darkness, a lone human caught outside after nightfall would have stood very little chance. It's close to certain that Aurignacian hunters occasionally became the hunted themselves. Picture sitting inside a cave, firelight the only thing holding back total darkness, hearing a lion's roar roll in from somewhere out on the black plain. That sound alone would have been enough to build an entire mythology around. Several hundred miles east of Chauvet, in the Swabian Jura region of southern Germany, cave paintings are scarce. What's there instead might be even more remarkable. A collection of astonishingly fine ivory carvings, small enough to hold in one hand, depicting lions, wild horses, waterfowl, even a tiny, unmistakably charming hedgehog. The same region produced the earliest known Venus figurines, small carved representations of the female form, found anywhere in the archaeological record. The single most famous object to come out of these caves, though, is something else entirely. A nearly foot-tall ivory figure with a human body and the unmistakable head of a lion. Researchers call it the Lion Man, though lion person might be the more accurate name. The figure carries no clear anatomical markers of sex, and its gender remains genuinely unresolved. Why anyone would carve a half-human, half-lion figure is impossible to say with certainty, but many archaeologists suspect it represents a shaman, some kind of spiritual intermediary capable of moving between the human world and the world of the animal they feared and respected above all others. That fear-respect combination can seem contradictory to modern ears, so it helps to have a living example. In East Africa, Maasai communities still live alongside wild lions today, and their relationship with the animal is layered, far from simple. Lions are honored, even ritually engaged with in traditional contexts, in a way that reflects deep respect rather than pure hostility, while other predators like hyenas get none of that same regard, just straightforward dislike. It isn't hard to imagine the Aurignacian relationship with cave lions running along similar lines, genuine terror mixed with genuine reverence, each feeling reinforcing the other rather than cancelling it out. Around a fire on a cold night, with a lion man figure watching from somewhere near the flames, it's easy to picture some kind of ritual taking place. An appeal for the lion's ferocity to guide tomorrow's hunt, perhaps, or a plea for protection from the very predator being honored. The same caves that produced the Lion Man also gave up something nobody expected to find this far back in time: flutes. 8 of them, carved with real precision from bird bone and mammoth ivory, holes drilled at carefully measured intervals. Sit with that image for a moment. Deep inside a freezing cave, 35,000 years ago, someone lifting a bone flute and playing a melody into the dark. Maybe it accompanied some ritual tied to the Lion Man. Maybe it simply filled the long, monotonous hours of an Ice Age night. Either way, it's one of the rare moments in the archaeological record where something unmistakably human and unmistakably artistic reaches across 35,000 years and meets you directly. Music and sculpture weren't the only way these people expressed who they were. 2 researchers, Marian van Heren and Francesco Derico, ran an ambitious study examining personal ornaments recovered from 98 separate Aurignacian sites scattered across the continent. What they found suggests something unexpectedly modern, distinct regional traditions, consistent enough to sort the broader Aurignacian population into at least 3 separate cultural groupings. The detail that makes this convincing is fairly simple. Communities in what's now Germany, Belgium, and southwestern France favored beads made from fox teeth. Communities in Italy, Greece, Spain, and Austria essentially never used them, despite foxes being just as available in those regions. That's not a resource availability gap. That's a choice, repeated consistently enough across an entire region to look like a cultural signature, quite possibly tied to a distinct language group. It isn't airtight proof. This kind of evidence rarely is, this far back in time. But small, consistent patterns like this are often the only kind of evidence 35,000-year-old history is willing to hand us. And they add up to something meaningful. Not one undifferentiated population, but several identifiable peoples, each with a clear sense of who they were and apparently who they weren't. Not everything about this world was cooperation and shared culture, though. Wherever people live in close quarters and depend on each other to survive, conflict follows. That's about as close to a universal rule of human behavior as anything gets. The total population here was so small and so thinly spread across such a vast area that archaeologists haven't found much evidence of large-scale fighting between groups. What they have found occasionally is something far more personal. A skull recovered from Cioclovina cave in modern Romania gave forensic researchers a genuine shock. Close analysis revealed unmistakable signs of a violent death. 2 forceful blows from a heavy, blunt object, likely wood or antler, probably some kind of club. Even more striking, the angle and pattern of the wounds allowed researchers to determine that whoever delivered them was left-handed. What triggered that fight, we'll never know. A dispute over a kill, a conflict over leadership, something else entirely lost to time. But that single skull and the direction of those 2 blows remains a quiet, permanent record of a fight that happened in the dark 35,000 years ago and ended in someone's death. Death, it turns out, raises an even bigger unanswered question about this culture. Fast forward to around 33,000 years ago, to the culture that eventually replaced the Aurignacian. Archaeologists call it the Gravettian, and you find clear, consistent evidence of formal burial. Bodies laid to rest with care, surrounded by tools, ornaments, and other grave goods. Go back just a few thousand years earlier, into the Aurignacian period itself, and that evidence simply disappears. Across the entire European continent, not a single confirmed Aurignacian burial has ever been found. So what happened to the dead? The leading theory is something archaeologists call excarnation, deliberately leaving a body exposed in the open landscape rather than burying it, letting it be reclaimed by the natural world instead of sealed away from it. When someone in the group died, the body may have been carried out onto the open steppe and left there under open sky for scavengers to find. Vultures, most likely. Possibly cave lions themselves. Sit with that for a second, and it starts to feel less grim and more like a genuine piece of belief. If these people really did revere the cave lion as something close to sacred, then having a body consumed by one might not have registered as a horror at all. It might have been understood as a kind of return, the human spirit dissolving back into the very predator these people feared and worshipped in equal measure, completing a cycle they understood, and we can only guess at now. One last question worth asking. What did these people actually look like? Physically similar to modern Europeans, or something else entirely? Modern genetics has quietly been answering that question for years. Ancient DNA recovered from remains of this period shows a clear, measurable genetic thread connecting these Ice Age Europeans to people alive today. Traces of their ancestry are still detectable in modern populations. Biologically, they weren't dramatically different from us. What set them apart wasn't their bodies. It was the unimaginable environment that forced them to build an entirely different way of living just to survive it. Named after a cave in France, feared and worshipped the lions that occasionally hunted them, ate reindeer nearly every single day of their lives, carved flutes out of bird bone and played music into the freezing dark, sent their own dead out into open sky instead of into the ground. By almost any honest measure, the Aurignacians were the first people to truly master Ice Age Europe. They didn't just endure a landscape ruled by mammoths, rhinos, and enormous hungry cats. Somewhere in the middle of that endurance, they found room to invent art, to invent music, to invent identity. And whatever thread connects us to them hasn't fully unraveled yet. It's sitting quietly in our own DNA, 35,000 years later, still there.